Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today to learn more about Airservices Australia's low-level airspace program. I'm Kristen Cruikshank, Airservices low-level airspace program manager, and I've been at the helm of the low-level airspace program since August 2019, having previously worked for Nova Systems and the Royal Australian Air Force. Today I'll be walking you through some of the details of our low-level airspace program, hopefully without wading through the depths of technical information that I, as an engineer, can be known for. The term low-level airspace is not strictly defined in a regulatory sense. It does not accord to a specific altitude limit, and it is used by air services simply to convey a concept. We can use it broadly to indicate the totality of new airspace users, such as UAM and drones operating at comparatively low altitudes, but it also encompasses some existing airspace users to some extent. Ultimately, we use the term low-level airspace to indicate where existing means of air traffic management, whether that be the traditional ATM or visual separation in Class G, is incapable of providing suitably safe and efficient services for new types of operations. Low-level airspace is not restricted to UAS and is not strictly everything below 400 feet. That brings me to what the low-level airspace program focuses on. To summarize, our program is focused on the safe integration of new airspace entrants into national airspace, but with an initial focus on the significant growth sectors being drones and UAM. Contrary to the title, we also have a longer-term focus on high-altitude operations, which I'll discuss a little more soon. Over the last 12 months, we've been engaging low-level airspace stakeholders nationally and internationally, so we have a reasonable picture of the different viewpoints and an understanding of how global developments might apply to the Australian environment. Suffice to say that progress is exceptionally fast, and internationally there is a significant amount of information to try and keep up with. In the last few months alone, the FAA released the Remote ID NPRM, the CSAR Concept of Operations for European UTM Systems, CORUS, released the latest version of their document. The FAA released the UTM ConOps version 2.0. The Swiss U-Space Initiative released version 1.1 of their U-Space ConOps. EASA released their opinion for a high-level regulatory framework for the U-Space, and many different nations have engaged with industry UTM providers to implement UTM systems. Additionally, there are standards being developed globally, and on the list goes. The three key areas that we believe Airservices has a role to play are aerodrome boundary management, UTM information flow and management, and low-level airspace structure. Starting with aerodrome boundary management, the objective really there is about protecting traditional air traffic from wayward or malicious drone operations and coordinating boundary low-level airspace traffic. So when you sort of piece that together, it's all about surveillance technologies to ensure that we know where drones are operating and how to protect our existing air traffic from them, and then being able to authorize access to airspace around aerodromes that previously wasn't easily accessible. For UTM information flow and management, really we're just trying to establish a means by which information can be shared amongst participants in low-level airspace. We want to use a globally aligned approach, and a core component of that is to implement a flight information management system to embed information flow across all the participants. Lastly, low-level airspace structure is essentially looking at how we would investigate designing low-level airspace to cater for all the different operations, aircraft type, mission profiles, and different levels of safety potentially as well. A fourth area of focus for the low-level airspace program, and I do see the irony in this, is high altitude traffic management or collaborative traffic management in the stratosphere. It may seem counterintuitive that the low-level Airspace team are focused on this part of the aviation market, but when you look at the underpinning technologies and proposed approach to CTMS, they are highly aligned. As the number of operators increases over time, which they are on an annual basis, there needs to be some form of traffic coordination where there traditionally hasn't been. Additionally, any high altitude operator needs to transit through various classes of existing airspace to get to their operating altitude. An integrated and preferably highly automated solution will need to be developed, and our team is well positioned to work with various high altitude operators to achieve this. For now, we're in the early stages of exploring options to work with current high altitude operators, particularly given our great relationships with companies like Loon, Airbus and Worldview in assisting them to safely enable their operations to date. I have mentioned it previously, but there is significant efforts being afforded to UTM and UAM in a global context. A relatively simple breakdown of all the activities is to consider them in a geographical sense, with the bulk of the work being conducted in the United States and Europe. Additionally, there are more internationally focused organizations attempting to bring about harmonization in a global sense through standards development or industry bodies. We have representation on 4 of these major bodies indicated in orange, but we can't be part of everything. Some of the most notable aspects of each of these programs or organizations are the NASA and FAA UTM Pilot Program number 2, which is an extension of the NASA UTM TCL program, the NASA Advanced Air Mobility National Campaign, previously the UAM Grand Challenge, ICAO's RPAS panel with associated working groups, the Joint Authorities on Regulation of Unmanned Systems, Working Group number 6, and incorporation of UTM and more advanced air risk models into the SORA. ASTM has 2 key standards at the moment, being Remote ID and the specification for service provided under UTM. CANSO has a UTM task force. ISO is developing a number of different standards to articulate UTM structure, data models for spatial data, requirements for UTM services and providers, and more. Assure is conducting research across a number of different areas, the results of which may be embedded in various UTM services or functions. The Swiss Airspace initiative is progressing a number of areas of UTM, focusing on implementation of the work produced by the FAA, CSAR, ASTM, and others. GUTMA continues to promote global harmonization through various conferences and activities. CSAR finished the Gulf of Finland trial last year, but continues to work on significant initiatives such as the concept of operation for European UTM systems, that's the CHORUS. And EASA continues to develop regulatory solutions for UTM and UAM. Despite significant global alignment on UTM, there are still and always will be some aspects that each nation will choose to deviate on. These aspects may be as a result of overarching national policy or using UTM for purposes in addition to strict safety considerations. As is the situation in our case, Australia is likely to use UTM to achieve the outcomes required of noise regulation, privacy regulation, and others. However, even with the potential for different national peculiarities, in nearly all instances that we've explored, nations are adopting the fundamental system architecture and roles and responsibilities originally proposed by NASA and now included in the FAA UTM CONOPS. The key elements to this being a FIMS managed by the ANSP, multiple supplemental data service providers serving UAS operators and UAS service suppliers, and UAS service suppliers ultimately being the customer-facing component of UTM services. Additionally, there's clear intent that as UAM operations are introduced and grow in number, UTM will, most likely in a graduated way, provide traffic management services to UAM. 2 key aspects that will need to be addressed for UTM to manage UAM will be the integrity or the safety level of UTM. Given that UAM will carry people, there will be a higher level of safety required to that of UAS. And communications mediums. 4G and 5G is unlikely to be suitable for the entire flight profile of most UAM vehicles, as they will predominantly cruise at altitudes higher than most UAS when there are more challenges, with the integrity of mobile networks. I'll now step you through some of our active projects aligned to our key focus areas, the first of which is aerodrome boundary management. So one of the projects we have underway at the moment involves partnering with CASA and the ADF to install a baseline drone surveillance capability at every controlled aerodrome. That's 29 across the nation. Our project is phased to ensure that we can simultaneously deploy, test, and operationalize a capability in the very near future. The intent of the drone surveillance program is to build out a real-time surveillance capability to ensure safety of existing airspace users across all of our controlled aerodromes. The phased approach broadly allows us to install equipment and begin data collection for phase one. Additionally, through analysis of the data, we're able to start determining where the high-risk areas are with respect to manned aircraft. The second phase is to establish a centralized remote monitoring facility. Just prior to the COVID-19 restrictions, we had identified suitable facilities, but have yet to fit them out. The third phase is to determine the most suitable means of integrating the surveillance capability with our ATC capability. To ensure that we can effectively mitigate against uncooperative drone operations, we need to determine in real time what is actually a threat and what isn't. Determine the best means of conveying this to ATC. So options there range from voice communications with ATC through to automated display at their consoles, and enhance our current ATC procedures dealing with uncooperative drones. A fourth phase of the drone surveillance program is to trial different kinds of drone surveillance technologies. Based on an analysis of risk through the baseline capability, we intend to implement additional surveillance systems to ensure as near to complete coverage of all drone types and scenarios at locations that warrant it on a risk basis. The different types of technology include active radar, passive RF intercept, visual, audio, and signal processing of existing RF transmissions to identify interference representing drones. We have not yet determined the most appropriate mix, nor which locations warrant the more robust capability, but that is coming over the next 6 to 12 months. Part of phase one is to analyze the data we're capturing to determine where the risk of the detected operation exceeds an acceptable threshold. While the CASAs are qualitatively risk-based, for example, limiting operations to below 400 feet in most instances, or excluding operations from within 3 nautical miles of a controlled aerodrome, we've started developing a quantitative approach that takes into account manned aircraft traffic data and drone surveillance data. It would be easy to use heat maps of detected drones above 400 feet, for example, and use that as a proxy for risk. While there are certainly legal ramifications to exceeding the standard operating conditions without permission, from Airservices' perspective, the only real means of ascertaining whether those illegal operations are a risk to manned aircraft is to assess quantitatively. This allows us then to focus on the locations that exhibit risky trends and to work with CASA and law enforcement agencies to establish more of a presence where it is required. At the same time, we're also seeking to merge our internal research and development with research organisations with extensive experience in this space. I'll talk about that soon. Some future activities that we intend to carry out include integrating drone surveillance with FIMS and any form of remote identification to distinguish cooperative and uncooperative drones, investigating more advanced means of identifying threats to ensure that we're only acting on things that could result in safety incidents, and automating the whole solution as much as we possibly can. Another area of research that we're actively involved in and that we've just finished up on the first phase of is with Queensland University of Technology. And that's to come up with automated airspace authorization maps for controlled aerodromes. The intended outcome of ongoing research in this space is to determine a risk-based approach to automated airspace approvals around aerodromes, providing operators with near instantaneous access to airspace that was previously difficult to access and costly. As part of our support to CASA, we partnered with QUT to apply their collision risk model to the equivalent of the FAA LANCE UAS facility maps. The benefit to our approach is that there is nothing qualitative about the model, and the outcome is accurate and consistent across different aerodromes and probabilistic in nature. What you see on the screen here is effectively a proof of concept applying QUT's approach based on a cell map created by CASA and Wing. Each hexagonal cell is 300 meters in radius with an associated maximum safe altitude based on 12 months worth of Airservices traffic data. We took a very conservative approach to the initial concept, and we expect that with future research, we'll be in a position to open up more airspace. Using this approach did identify a number of areas within the 3 nautical mile template that are much higher risk than we would have potentially considered previously. You can see various patterns that emerge that are a result of the traffic and are not just how far away from the runway you are. As we continue to develop this concept in concert with CASA, we will be in a position to provide automated access akin to the FAA LANCE system, but with increase to airspace based on robust and quantitative analysis. While we worked with QUT to map the model to the CASA hexagonal cells, different approaches to sectorizing airspace may provide drone operators with even greater access to airspace. This visual shows a much higher resolution point-based depiction of the safe altitudes determined in the prior map. Effectively, this model underpins the prior cell-based model. You'll notice that there is far more accessible airspace in this instance, where blue indicates operations that are safe up to 400 feet. The reason why the previous image is so much more restrictive is because for each cell, we effectively use the most conservative, lowest safe altitude as the maximum safe height for each cell. By considering the possibility of defining airspace structure, that is the approval cells, based on the analysis of the risk itself, a more optimized model may be produced. Instead of predefined cell shapes and sizes, cells could be defined by the areas of risk. So for example, drawing a polygon around all of the black in the center of this image being one cell. So if we were to maybe demonstrate this, we could possibly have a cell that covers all the black here, something akin to this, and excuse my terrible drawing skills. And then, other cells could exist down here. So the idea being that you design the cells based on the actual risk picture rather than the other way around. So there's plenty more work that we're intending to continue with this in this space to refine and operationalize a suitable solution. The next focus area is UTM information flow and management. There is a lot more to be developed in this area, but initially I'll talk about an activity that is currently underway. So another priority area for us is to address some long-standing issues with our existing aeronautical information, which are not issues for our traditional users. The reasoning behind this is that there is a far greater tolerance for error margins regarding the accuracy of data with our traditional users. An example of this will follow on it shows here, but there are many others that come up when you're far closer to the ground or on it. In addition to our existing data, we're looking at other sources of data, either generated by Airservices or the others, that may need to be provided from and managed by a central source of truth. Some of these data sets might be enhanced obstacle data, the equivalent to FAAUS facility maps, and more. Ultimately, we would seek to provide these as part of a future FIM solution, providing an analogous service to the FAA-UAS data delivery system. So you can see here an example of the issues that we've been coming across. Many of you might already be familiar with the R405 restricted airspace covering the Sydney Harbour. Essentially, the geo border for the restricted airspace is around 200 metres offset from where it should be in a number of locations, resulting in the data indicating that you can operate over the water in some areas and not over land in others, when the intent has always been to prevent operation over the water, but not prevent operations over land. It's a minor discrepancy, but causes a lot of issues for drone operators. So to correct issues such as this, we need to source accurate data from appropriate national and state authorities and merge it with our existing data sets. The image at the bottom here shows the correct data in red compared to the data in our system in green. We're currently exploring the most efficient and low-cost way of providing UTM aeronautical information management services to our low-level airspace users, as we know that our existing methods, costs, and responsiveness is just not suitable for this new environment. Lastly, we are focused on optimizing the structure of low-level airspace to ensure maximum access to all airspace users while maintaining efficiency, safety, security, and equitable access to that airspace. Another project that we're conducting is that of investigating UAM traffic management. Working with industry, we're seeking to define how Airservices would enable UAM operations in the first instance using existing ATM processes and systems, while preparing for the shift to more automated traffic management as UTM becomes sufficiently mature. Currently, the biggest issue with relying upon UTM to provide traffic management services to UAM vehicles is that UAM carry people. In the drone environment, it is broadly accepted that lower levels of reliability and safety of flight are acceptable due to the fact that there are no people on board, noting that the level of risk to the general public can't be reduced. And this is the case for UTM in its current state. So to facilitate initial UAM operations, the existing ATM will play a leading role. There are, however, significant limitations with ATM. While it caters aptly for safety, it can't deal with the scale of operations intended for UAM. So considering UAM traffic management across a horizons model, we're considering the fact that even with relatively small growth, there will be a limit to voice communications and use of humans to control all aspects of UAM traffic management. This is where we expect UTM services to start supplementing ATM, the start of Horizon 2. Gradually, as UTM services become sufficiently mature and UAM traffic densities increase, UTM will fulfill more and more of the traffic management service. There's still a lot of effort to be afforded to this space, but we're taking a view of global alignment, acknowledging that we may be one of the very early nations to facilitate UAM operations and therefore can't expect UTM to do everything on day one. The last area of investigation and research considers both international baselining and international and industry collaboration to explore the different options to airspace structure within low-level airspace. The CSAR concept of operations for European UTM systems, for example, proposes X, Y, and Z class airspace within U space, with variations in Z class depending on where the tactical conflict resolution service comes from. By working through options for UAM traffic management, we can also look at different structures within and above 400 feet that might support UAM in an efficient, safe, secure, and equitable way. We're hoping to begin some modeling and simulation activities in the very near future to look holistically at low-level airspace from an operational scenario perspective, and then determine the pros and cons of different airspace structures also. We hope to have more to brief on this soon. That's a brief overview of our program as it currently stands. Thank you for your time today, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions you might have. I'm more than happy to talk. Cheers.